Modern Dadhood. Modern Dadhood podcast.
What is this? What are we doing? What are these microphones? Who are you?
Do you want to record an episode with me right now?
An episode of what?
An episode of Modern Dadhood. An ongoing conversation about the joys, challenges, and general insanity of being a dad in this moment. My name is Adam Flaherty. I forgot what comes after that. My name is Adam Flaherty. I'm a dad of two daughters who are 8 years old and 5 years old. And you?
And my name's Mark. Full name, Mark Andrew Checkett.
Mark Andrew.
Yeah. And I'm a dad to twin boy 4-year-olds. Boom. And I am tired all the time.
Me too.
I don't mind admitting that some days I just feel like defeated. I feel like they won.
Totally.
You know?
Totally.
You feel like the children just controlled much of the day, and I didn't really get a chance to do my job as dad.
I love my girls so much, but I've used the phrase "I can't" more often in the last 6 months than in my entire life, because they'll get bickering over like nothing at all, and it'll just spiral out of control, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. And I just have to step back and say, I just can't deal with this right now. I cannot process what's happening.
Sometimes you absolutely need to just step away. Mm-hmm. You know what? I can't. Going out in the front porch. I need fresh air. I'll deal with all of this. No. Yeah. I reach into that breast pocket and I pull out a nice tall Pall Mall.
I love that it's become a recurring theme.
Yeah, it's now a recurring theme. Do you find yourself saying some of those like troupe parenthood lines? I'll give you an example. Just tonight, I looked at one of my kids, and whatever it was they said prompted me to say, "Do I look like your mother?" Because they were saying something that mom said to them, and now they were yelling at me but I wasn't a part of the conversation that she had with them, and now I'm getting yelled at by a 4-year-old over it, and I just responded with, "Do I look like your mother?"
Yeah,
it was like such like a snarky TV dad thing to say.
What was the response?
I don't know. I went out for a cigarette after that.
Perfect. Well, today's guest is someone who's been on our podcast. I don't know. Would you call it a podcast bucket list?
Sure.
He's been on our list since the beginning, and I am extremely excited to chat with Michael Ian Black.
Very much same. He's really been on. I want to say that you threw out his name like way back.
He's done a lot of writing and speaking in the fatherhood space or genre. And I've just been a fan of his for a long time, his comedy and his acting. So it just seemed natural. And you know what?
What?
Now he's joining us.
You mean right now?
Shortly.
Oh, geez, Louise. Stay tuned. Stick around. Whew, okay. I'll get myself ready.
Mark check. Mark?
Yeah.
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 Yes.
I'm here.
I feel like we've been taking on some heavier themes lately.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't know. I don't think it was by design. I think some of these topics have presented themselves almost, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I would agree. And I don't feel like when I say, heavier topics, it's not necessarily always dark topics, just more thought-provoking fatherhood themes.
The type of stuff that you want to talk about, but sometimes find it hard to begin even talking about. How do you get into some of these topics? They're expansive.
And well, I mean, I would love to think that this podcast could be sort of an entryway for dads and moms listening to have these conversations with, among themselves, but, also with their kids. I will say one of the really great things that has come out of hosting this podcast with you is that it has given us access to some really incredible thought leaders, which make it easier to have the conversations. They kind of give us the language and the tools to be able to have the conversations and really understand the topics and themes on a deeper level.
I think also the show has, in some cases, opened the door to, there's been several occasions where, because of the show, I've learned about an author, or I've learned about a particular book that maybe I otherwise might not have heard of, but have since read and been blown away by.
That's sort of a theme that has run through the history of our podcast is, a lot of times one conversation leads to another guest on a different topic. Things sort of fall into place, and the topics present themselves at the right time and the guests, just kind of fall in, and I'm really enjoying it.
Curiously, only one astronaut though. Like, how come not more people who have been to space?
Right. Like, when is Buzz Aldrin going to email you?
Yeah. What's the holdup, I guess? Too busy flying around in rockets? Oh.
This has gone off the rails.
Damn it. But yeah, and speaking of books that are destined to become permanent fixtures of my collection, Michael Ian Black's book now at this point, it's a couple years old. It was released September 15th, 2020. It was published. You and I both recently read it, and I think
it's called A Better Man, for the record, and you can buy it wherever you buy books, local bookstore, Amazon, Powell's. You can also listen to Michael himself narrate it if you go to audible.com.
Highly recommend this book. It's absolutely wonderful, and I'm sure we'll touch on a lot of the topics in our conversation with Michael in a minute.
Well, I see him in the waiting room. Why don't we let him in?
Let's not be rude.
Michael Ian Black is many things. He's a comedian, actor, writer, director, fellow podcaster. He's a husband and a father of 2 kids, Elijah and Ruthie.
He's handsome. He's very handsome.
He is stunningly handsome.
Very famous also.
Incredibly famous.
I've heard.
Owns an air fryer.
Whoa.
Michael's someone who I've been a fan of for a long time. And Michael, to have you on our podcast here to talk about being dads is a real treat. So thank you for making time to join us.
Well, thank you, Adam. Hello, Mark. Thanks for having me. A delight to be here. And I got the air fryer. I didn't use it today, but it's been in heavy rotation for the last couple of weeks in my house.
It's actually in the house. I feel like an air fryer is one of those things that you get, but somehow ends up kind of in the basement or maybe in the garage, No.
It has a place of prominence right now in my kitchen where it is being used almost on the daily to make primarily chicken breasts. I've been eating a lot of chicken breasts.
A few years ago, it was the pressure cooker, right? And then the next year was the air fryer was the thing that everybody was buying. What's 2022's thing?
I hope we're just going to go back to classics, waffle maker. I hope we're just going to get right on back to the waffle maker, which is just, what a great invention that is. Holy cow, you end up with a waffle at the end of it.
This is true. I like the ones that you close, but you can flip. While it's closed,
I don't know those.
You can rotate it in the little mechanism. It's really, you find them at Hampton Inns all over.
Okay.
I don't know if Hampton Inn is still a thing or not, but
I don't normally slum it at hotels of that level, but hotels I go to, it's definitely not a make your own waffle situation. There's teams of people doing nothing but making waffles for you.
Just serving up Michael's waffles.
So, Michael, the first time that I remember seeing your work and really following your career, probably not one of your most famous roles. I think it falls somewhere in between The State and when Stella got picked up by Comedy Central. Do you care to wager a guess based on that time period? A network, a TV show?
Oh, Ed, that TV show?
Nope.
Spy TV, that TV show?
You've done a lot.
Then I don't know.
The character was
if it's in that time period.
The character was Johnny Blue Jeans.
Oh, sure. Yeah, Viva Variety.
The show is Viva Variety, and that's how I got into you, and it's been like such a joy sort of following your career since then.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah, Viva Variety was a fake European variety show that we did on Comedy Central for 3-4 years, something like that. And I played Johnny Blue Jeans, who was the sidekick on the show.
Okay, so thank you again for coming onto Modern Dadhood to talk about dad stuff with us. Mm-hmm. We're both huge fans of your book, A Better Man, which, if our listeners aren't familiar, it's an open letter that you wrote to your son, Elijah, who at the time was preparing to go to college.
Yes.
But before we really get into it, we just wanted to ask, it's been a couple years since the release. There's been a whole global pandemic. I'm not sure if you're aware of that.
Yeah. I've heard. The COVID one, right?
Yes.
That's
okay.
The one.
You know about it.
Yep. Oh yeah. I pay attention to the news. You got to.
It's big. It's a big thing. How are things going with you, your family? How are things going for Elijah and of course Ruthie as well?
Everybody's fine. We've come through it fairly unscathed, and so we've had a fairly smooth run of it health-wise. And then I think we have endured it psychologically, probably the same as many other people, which is maybe not as smoothly, but it definitely precipitated changes in our lives. For example, I now live in Georgia. Whereas pre-pandemic, I lived in Connecticut, and those are related. I mean, showbiz shut down, and very quickly I realized, I can no longer afford my house. And then concurrent with that, the market where I was just went bananas. And so we sold our house and moved to Georgia, and here we are living in Savannah.
It's crazy.
When you wrote A Better Man, obviously you had 2 kids in the house living with you. Having 2 kids who are now out of the house, I wonder sort of how your maybe how your identity as a father has kind of changed since your kids have become old enough to move out of the house and live on their own.
Well, it's a gradual process. I mean, it doesn't happen all at once. How old are your kids?
I have 2 daughters who are 8 and 5. Mark's 2 twin boys are 4 years old.
Okay, so life has kind of figured this out in a really good way where, and I'm sure you're aware of this in theory, if not in actual practice, but by the time they get to like 15, 16 years old, like they are sort of moving away from you anyway, even if they are not physically separated from you. And by the time they actually leave, you kind of want them to leave because they're terrible. And you're sort of like, I think you need to go. And they go. And then you sort of sit with that for a moment and you're like, well, wait a minute. First one kid went and then the other kid went and now it's just me and you. How are we? And then it turns out you're terrific. It turns out you haven't been better in years. You don't have to think about, well, wait, what are they going to eat for dinner? Did you do your homework? You're not yelling at them about that. It's great. Being an empty nester is terrific. You should try it. I know your kids are young, but maybe try it now.
We could kick them out faster. Yeah.
Send them off to summer camp.
It's so hard to think about. I mean, obviously, for obvious reasons, it's hard to place myself in your shoes, right? I mean, my kids are only 4 years old, but you're right. At the beginning of the process, it's such a gradual thing. And I mean, I'm obviously still growing and changing and adapting, like sometimes by the minute is what it feels like. And of course it makes sense that would sort of happen on the other end of it as well. But
yeah, that being said, like, you start to develop a relationship with your kids, or I have anyway, in the middle of, it happens gradually where you're sort of like, you go from being, the guy who's telling them what to do, the guy who's in charge, to the guy who's like, you probably know a little bit more about this than I do, to the guy who's just like, it feels like in a weird way, this is not quite the right word. We're not friends. We're not peers, but like, the relationship is more of an adult relationship now. And they're still young. I mean, my son is about to turn 21. My daughter is 18. But you definitely, I can sort of sense like what an adult relationship with them will be like.
Do you worry about them less?
Constantly? No. You don't stop worrying about them. And that's what everybody, I guess I sort of expected that. I mean, I expected to not stop worrying about them. But at the same time, I try to remember what it was like for me when I was their age. And knowing that my mom was probably worried sick about me living in New York City, and wanting to be an actor of all things, and remembering that I felt fine. Like, I had my own shit that I was dealing with, but like I wasn't worried about me in the way that I'm sure my mother was worried about me. And so I try to remember that my kids probably aren't worried about themselves in the way that we constantly worry about them. They're probably fine.
So I don't want to use our time together to just summarize your book, because I would love for parents listening to actually go read it or listen to it. Yeah. But one of the themes that really struck me was something that came up more than once in the book. And it's this notion of being authentic to yourself. And when I first got into your comedy, like I mentioned, Viva Variety, but it was your stand-up, it was The State and Stella. I was drawn to you because I think I could relate to your style of humor. You were obviously very dry and sarcastic. In the book, you use this phrase, ironic detachment. And for me, I identified with that because I feel like my whole life, people have said to me, like, I can't tell if you're being sincere or not. I can't tell if you're being serious or if you're fucking with me. And it never.
Do you always know when you're being sincere?
I do. But in fairness to them, sometimes I am like fucking with people. And I've always kind of like enjoyed that. I don't know. It's the mystery of that. And I've been drawn to artists who evoke that, to musicians who kind of work that into their music, this sort of tongue in cheek thing. But when I became a dad is, I think, when it started sort of bothering me, when I would deliver somebody a compliment or say something genuine or offer congratulations. And somebody would say, I can't tell if you're being serious with me. And I think it's because I never want my daughters I never want to say something to my daughters, give them encouragement, tell them they did a great job with something and have them say that back to me. I never want there to be a doubt that I'm being sincere with them.
You did a great job, honey. Wait,
are you fucking with me?
Are you fucking with me right now?
Exactly. You have this great quote in the book. You say, for me to be the kind of dad I wanted to be required a set of skills at odds with the sardonic persona that had served me well for so long. And then you say, that guy didn't give a shit. This guy did. So I wonder if maybe you could talk about this shift that happened within you when you became a dad.
Well, I think it's kind of exactly what you said. Young children are famously not very good at understanding sarcasm.
Some of them are just terrible at it.
They just don't get irony at all. And you sort of feel like I felt like I couldn't continue being that ironically detached person and be the kind of dad I wanted to be, because it wasn't like I could just turn that on and off on stage. I didn't have that skill set. Like it was hard for me to uninhabit that character. And so I realized that I was going to have to do that. I realized I was going to have to take off that uniform. That necessitated learning how to be more vulnerable and learning how to open up my heart a little bit more than I'd been willing to do before, just to accommodate the kind of dad I wanted to be. And it hasn't always been easy. I haven't always succeeded. But I felt like I didn't have a choice. And so in doing that, I felt like I also had to sort of change who I was professionally to a certain degree. And I think that was good for me. I know that was good for me, at least as a human. I don't know that it was particularly remuneratively good for me.
I was going to ask, I know that obviously the pandemic has hurt actors in any sort of touring professional and actors, obviously, in a big way. But did that shift in your private set of values that then extended to your on-stage persona hurt your career?
It did. I think so. In some ways. When my son was born, I I was fairly well known for these I love the 70s, 80s, 90s shows on VH1 that they just ran into the ground. And I started doing stand-up around that time in a more developed and serious way. And the character that I, for lack of a better word, that I was doing on those shows was exactly that kind of ironically detached person who just was like, shitting on everybody's childhood. And loving doing that. But that was exactly the kind of character that I felt like I needed to crack open to learn how to be a dad. And so where it might have been easy to sort of pigeonhole me as that thing, as my stand-up developed and changed and evolved in conjunction with being a dad, and as my writing style changed and evolved, I wasn't capable of doing that anymore to the same extent. And I think that might have hurt me.
When you say crack open that character a little bit, what do you mean by that?
The instinct to always go for the sardonic moment, the sarcastic moment, the totally dry moment. Those are all really valuable tools for a comedian, and tools that I think I still have. But what I wasn't able to do was be earnest, be vulnerable, be sincere. That thing, I wasn't able, I had that same thing, Adam, where somebody's going, I don't know if you're being serious or not. That's been with me my whole life. And I wanted people to know if I was being serious or not, and so it required opening up my toolbox and sharpening up tools that maybe were kind of dull.
Yeah.
And then getting the chisel and cracking open the character. I had to get the metaphor to work somehow.
It worked.
So I got the chisel and then I cracked.
Yeah, it was I saw the wheels turning and the journey was
Thanks. Well, I'm a professional writer, so
it's clear. Yep. All right. So speaking of writing, we do want to talk about a lot of what you get at in the book, and a theme that you explore a bunch in the book is toxic masculinity. And the way that you approach the term itself is, and it's kind of the way that I feel also about the term. In fact, there's so many instances over and over again in that book where I'm reading it and you say something and I go, damn it, that's the thing that I've not been able to express in words before. That's how I feel about that too. That's I've never been able to find the way to express it. And that just happened over and over and over in that book. But back to the toxic masculinity thing, I just wonder if we can maybe get into that conversation, but by first you sharing a little bit, maybe why you feel like that phrase is flawed.
I don't use the term. And the reason I don't is because I feel like, unfortunately, we as a culture don't have a sense of what healthy masculinity is. We don't even have a sense of what masculinity is. We don't know what it is. We don't have a good definition for it. And consequently, that unfortunate adjective, toxic, affixes itself so readily to masculinity because we don't have a kind of healthy masculinity to contrast it with. And so the two words in some cases have become synonymous. I don't want masculinity in general to be thought of toxic because I don't think it is. I don't think you can say the behaviors and mannerisms of an entire gender of people are inherently toxic. I don't think they are. And I'm not saying that there is one set of behaviors and mannerisms. I mean, it's such a loaded thing to talk about. But in the sort of most general sense of masculinity, unfortunately, because we don't know what it is, we can't describe readily what healthy masculinity is. And so I try to avoid using the term toxic masculinity. And another reason is because a lot of behaviors that we associate with toxic masculinity, aggression, sort of maybe overt sexuality, independence sometimes, like a lot of these attributes aren't in and of themselves toxic. A lot of what we think about when we think about masculinity can kind of go one of two ways. There's a healthy way to exhibit strength. There's a healthy way to express your sexuality. There's a healthy way to be stoic. There's healthy ways to do all of this stuff. And then there's the sort of toxic version of it. And unfortunately, the toxic version of it has predominated the conversation, and rightly, incidentally. I mean, we wouldn't be talking about it if it wasn't problematic.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I think there's still a large segment of our population that wants to push boys into behaviors that can easily become toxic. And that's what I'm looking to address.
Yeah. And, a few minutes ago, you said it's such a loaded thing, and it the whole topic is such a loaded thing. And Adam and I, we hung out today at lunchtime. Not in real life, because you don't in real life anymore. It was just like this. We hung out at lunchtime.
No, one doesn't see one another.
We drive to each other's houses and drop things on each other's porches.
Yeah.
We drove to each other's houses and zoomed from our cars.
Wasn't it great? Wasn't it great hanging out? Obviously, we've been preparing for the interview, but even still today, we're just like, man, it's such a expansive topic, and it's how do you even get into it, and where do you take it from there in a way that's constructive and feels like something that we can share with an audience, I mean,
and you're not cheapening it, by limiting it to a 60 seconds of a 25-minute conversation. What you faced in preparing for this interview was exactly the problem that I faced in trying to sit down and write a book about it. Like, how do you even wrap your hands around this topic, particularly because it's a topic that's so under-discussed in the culture? We have spent the last half century talking about women's roles in the culture, and we've seen enormous progress as a result of that. I'd like that same conversation to start happening around men and manhood. It's overdue. It needs to happen. And so, this book was just my stab at trying to move that conversation forward a hair. The way I approached it was because I didn't know how to wrap my head around it either. I just started with attributes. I just started with, what do I think of when I think of masculinity? What are the things that I think of, and how do those things inform how I think of myself, how I think of my son, and how do I go below the surface to think about in a deeper way, like, what is strength, for example? Because strength is sort of the big one that I think of when I think of masculinity. Sure.
I think men are strong.
Yeah.
And then, so, okay, I can get with that, but what does that mean? What is strength? How do we think about strength in the culture? Because when we think about dudes and we think about strong dudes, the first thing that comes to my mind is buff dudes, or dudes like Joe Rogan, who are like jacked up and can lift things. And you're like, okay, yeah, that is absolutely a form of strength. Like, that physical strength is absolutely a form of strength.
Yeah.
And of dubious value. It at one point in our evolution, many points in our evolution, that had tremendous value. It has less practical value today. Nothing wrong with it. I want to be physically strong. I've been going to the gym a lot lately, and I'm still weak as fuck. But I would like that. But then, so you've got physical strength, you've got mental strength, which is also an attribute, a classically masculine attribute, that idea of mental toughness. There's spiritual strength. But then the further I looked into it, and I'm only sort of, speaking about strength right now, I started to realize that there's a kind of deeper strength in what we traditionally think of as male weakness, which is the strength of vulnerability, the strength of empathy, the strength of love. Because so much of what we think about when we think about manhood and we think about strength, The reason we want our men to be strong is because we want them to be able to defend, to protect the tribe, to protect the clan, to protect whatever. We raise boys to be soldiers, in essence. And so we arm them and we give them armor. But when you peel away that armor, when you start taking that off and unbuckling it, you realize there's an even greater strength in standing before the world, unarmed, vulnerable, and saying, essentially, this is who I am. Do with me what you will, but like, I can't change who I am. This is who I am. That's a tremendous moment of vulnerability in any man's life, but it's also, I think, and even more so, a moment of tremendous strength. And a lot of this stuff, when you boil down sort of the essence of manhood and you really distill it, I think you get to that moment of absolute vulnerability and standing there and being true to yourself. Incidentally, you get to that same place in when you distill femininity too, because you get to that place when you distill humanity. And in this sort of gender dichotomy that we have, we tend to put the two sexes in opposite camps, or if not opposing, then contrasting camps. And what we lose, I think, is the vast amount of overlap that's there. And that overlap is just our basic humanity.
Our chat with Michael Ian Black only gets better from here, so stay tuned for part 2 in our next episode. Dads, you can find Modern Dadhood wherever you listen to your podcasts or at moderndadhood.com. We would ask that you please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review wherever you listen.
Yeah, would it kill you?
Also, tell a friend, because word of mouth really, truly does go a long way.
Yeah, would that kill you?
Yeah, I don't think it would. One reason to subscribe right now is because our next episode will be part 2 of our chat with Michael Ian Black, and you're not going to want to miss it. Trust me.
Well, hey, while you're on the outro train, we should mention that people can write in to hey@moderndadhood.com. They can do that. They can also stop by the website and pick up a dad hoodie or a t-shirt for themselves or a friend.
Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Just Google Modern Dadhood. All that stuff will come up. And we'd love to say thank you to Casper Baby Pants and Spencer Albee for the music you hear in Modern Dadhood. We would like to thank Pete Morse at Red Vault Audio. That's redvaultaudio.com for making us sound great. And thanks to Michael Ian Black for making our dreams come true.
And thank you for listening.
Podcast. Living modern.